The crash of paintings scattering across hot pavement split the Tuesday afternoon silence on South Congress Avenue. Julia Reed watched in horror as her watercolor's 6 weeks of work skittered across the sidewalk like broken dreams. Her knees hit the concrete hard, sending a sharp pain through her already aching body, but she barely noticed. All she could see were the paintings, some now bearing footprints from passing strangers who didn't even slow down. No, no, she whispered, voice cracking, as she reached for a portrait of sunflowers now torn down the middle. This one was supposed to pay for Thursday's treatment. That one, the birds in flight, was meant to cover her anti-nausea medication. Her trembling fingers struggled to gather the scattered pieces, each movement costing energy she couldn't afford to spend. Julia glanced down at her wrist, where the medical alert bracelet caught the harsh Texas sun. 14 months after their graduating from art school with honors, 12 months after receiving her diagnosis. Stage 3 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, the words that had rewritten her entire future. I'm so sorry, I wasn't watching where I was going. A man's voice cut through her panic. Please let me help. Julia looked up to see a well-dressed man in his late 30s already gathering her scattered artwork with careful hands. Behind him, a little girl with golden braids and wide eyes stood frozen clearly, the one who had accidentally collided with Julia's display easel. But it wasn't anger that flooded through Julia. It was exhaustion, bone-deep, soul-crushing exhaustion that made her want to just sit there on that hot sidewalk and give up. It's fine, she managed, though her trembling hands betrayed her. Accidents happen. The man froze as he noticed her hands, how they shook not from emotion, but from something deeper. His eyes flickered to her medical alert bracelet, then back to her, face recognition dawning in his expression. Not recognition of her specifically, but of what she was going through. He'd seen it before. These are incredible, he said softly, holding up a painting of a small girl releasing a paper airplane into a sunset skimon. The child's expression captured pure hope, watching her creation soar into an uncertain future. Julia pushed herself to her feet, swaying slightly. The afternoon sun felt like hammers against her skull. 3 days since her last treatment, and the nausea was finally manageable enough to sit outside for a few hours. But the weakness remained a constant companion she couldn't shake. Did you paint all of these, everyone? Julia tried to smile, but it felt more like a grimace. Though after today I might need to paint faster. Rent doesn't wait for clumsy artists. She tried for humor, but the man heard the desperation beneath it. He watched her steady herself against the overturned table, noticed how her breathing seemed labored, despite the minimal exertion. The little girl had edged closer to her father, half hiding behind his expensive suit pants. Daddy, she whispered loud enough for Julia to hear. Is she sick like Mommy was? The man placed a gentle hand on his daughter's head, but his eyes never left Julia's face. How much for this one? He held up the paper airplane painting. $40. Then, seeing his expensive watch and tailored shirt, she quickly added, but I could do 30. I'll take 5 paintings, $200. The words hung in the air between them. Julia's eyes widened, and for a moment the man thought she might refuse. Pride flickered across her face, warring with need. You don't have to. I'm not being charitable, though they both knew he was lying. My daughter loves art. She's 9 and lost her mom 3 years ago. Art became her way of processing things. These would mean something to her. The mention of a motherless child softened something in Julia's expression. She understood loss, understood how art could be a lifeline when everything else felt like drowning. All right, she whispered, but you choose them. Each one should mean something. As the man selected paintings, the paper airplane, a woman dancing in rain, children chasing fireflies, a tree growing through concrete, and 2 hands reaching for each other across a divide, Julia carefully wrapped each one. Her movements were slow, deliberate, like she was conserving energy for something more important. I'm Julia Reed, she offered, needing him to see her as a person, not just a charity case. Thomas Wright, and this is my daughter Sophie. Sophie stepped forward slightly, her curiosity beginning to overcome her shyness. She studied Julia's pale complexion, the colorful scarf wrapped around her head where hair should be. A medical bill slipped from Julia's bag as she reached for tape. The number at the bottom made Thomas's heart skip. $47,000. Past due stamps covered it like accusations. I should go, Julia said quickly, stuffing the bill back into her bag. The afternoon medication makes me drowsy if I don't take it with food, and I've already missed the window. When did you last eat? The questions surprised them both. Julia blinked, trying to remember. This morning, I think. Maybe yesterday. The nausea makes it hard to... Without a word, Thomas pulled out his phone. There's a food truck around the corner. Best tacos in Austin. What can you eat? I can't let you. You're not letting me. I'm insisting. Besides, you just made a major sale. We should celebrate. 20 minutes later, they sat on a bench in the shade, Julia nibbling carefully at a plain quesadilla, while Thomas pretended not to watch her struggle with each bite. Between them, the wrapped paintings created a small barrier that neither seemed eager to maintain. Sophie had wandered a few feet away, fascinated by a street performer juggling fire. Lymphoma, Julia said suddenly. Stage 3, diagnosed 8 months ago, 2 weeks after graduating from art school. Cosmic joke, right? 4 years preparing for a future that might not exist. Don't say that. Why not? It's true, the doctors give me 50-50 odds if I can complete treatment, but that's a meant if. Each session costs $3,000. Insurance covers some, but not enough. Not nearly enough. She talked about her parents, then how they died in a boating accident when she was 16. How she'd used every penny of her inheritance for art school, believing she was investing in her future. How she'd been so ready to take on the world portfolio in hand until the first symptom appeared, a swollen lymph node she'd ignored for too long. So now I paint, she continued, gesturing at her makeshift stand. $7 here, 20 there, sometimes 40 if I'm lucky. It's not enough, but it's something. It's doing something. Thomas understood that need to do something, anything, when life spiraled beyond control. After Catherine's diagnosis, he'd reorganized their entire house, created spreadsheets for medications, built a support schedule that accounted for every minute. None of it had saved her, but the doing had kept him sane. My daughter Sophie, he said, watching the little girl who now sat cross-legged before the street performer. She started painting after her mom died. Wouldn't talk for 3 months. Just painted oceans of blue, like she was trying to drown the grief in color. Did it help? Eventually, an art therapist told me children process trauma through creation, that making something beautiful from pain is how humans have always survived. He paused. I think that's what you're doing too. Not just selling art, creating hope. Julia's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Hope doesn't pay for chemotherapy. No, Thomas agreed, but sometimes hope brings something better than money. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He stood in Sophie's room, watching his daughter breathe, surrounded by her own paintings. The walls were covered in them, purple skies, orange trees, people with rainbow skin. In the corner hung the 5 paintings he'd bought from Julia, already finding their place in Sophie's colorful world. Daddy, Sophie stirred. Why are you sad? He hadn't realized he was crying. Not sad, sweetheart, just thinking about Mommy, about someone who needs help. Like Mommy needed help. Yeah, like that. Then we help them, Sophie said simply. That's what people do. They help. The next morning, after dropping Sophie at summer art camp, Thomas returned to South Congress. Julia was there, as he somehow knew she would be painting, even as she sat beside her display. Her hand trembled slightly as she worked, but her focus never wavered. Back already. She looked up with surprise. Don't tell me you need more paintings. Thomas hesitated. In the harsh morning light, Julia looked even more fragile than she had yesterday. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her skin had a translucent quality that reminded him too much of Catherine in her final months. A tightness formed in his chest, a warning, a reminder of pain he'd sworn never to revisit. Actually, I have a proposition. Julia's brush stilled. She'd heard that before. Men who thought they could buy more than art. People who confused desperation with availability. Seeing her expression, Thomas quickly continued. My company needs artwork for our new office space. 27 blank walls in the lobby, conference rooms, break areas. I showed your work to our design committee yesterday. They're interested. That's very kind, but there's more. We want to host an art showing in our building, feature local artists, invite clients, make it an event. You'd be the featured artist. The hope that flickered in her eyes nearly broke him. Then just as quickly it died. I can't. She set down her brush. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I don't need pity. I don't need some tech executive playing savior because he feels guilty about having money while I'm dying on a street corner. The words hung between them like a challenge. Thomas could have been offended, could have walked away. Instead, he pulled over a plastic crate and sat down beside her. "You're right," he said simply. "I do feel guilty. I have excellent health insurance. My bank account could cover your medical bills without me noticing. That's not fair, and it makes me angry." Julia blinked, not expecting honesty. "But this isn't about guilt," he continued. "When my wife was sick, I pushed everyone away. Thought accepting help meant I was failing her. Our friends wanted to organize meal trains, fundraisers, support groups. I refused it all. Told myself we were fine, that we could handle it alone." He paused, watching a tourist examine one of Julia's paintings. "Catherine died on a Tuesday. Ordinary Tuesday. Nothing special about it. And you know what she said that morning? She said she wished she could have seen our community come together, that she wanted Sophie to remember people rallying around us, not just the isolation of illness. I robbed her of that, robbed Sophie of seeing how people can lift each other up." "I don't even know you," Julia whispered. "No, but you know what it's like to face something bigger than yourself. And I know what it's like to watch someone fight that battle. Maybe that's enough." She was quiet for a long moment, adding delicate strokes to her painting. A girl standing at the edge of a cliff, paper wings strapped to her arms, about to leap. "What if I can't finish the show? I mean, what if I get too sick? Then we'll display whatever you've created, even if it's just one painting, even if it's unfinished. Sometimes the most beautiful art is incomplete." Thomas returned the following afternoon with Sophie in tow. The little girl clutched her father's hand tightly, her eyes wide with apprehension as they approached Julia's stand. Julia looked up from her painting, surprise flickering across her face. She hadn't expected to see him again so soon, and certainly not with his daughter. "Sophie wanted to meet you properly," Thomas explained. "She's been asking about your paintings all day." Sophie remained half hidden behind her father, studying Julia with the unfiltered curiosity only children possess. Her eyes lingered on Julia's colorful headscarf, then moved to the medical alert bracelet on her wrist. "Why is your hair like that?" Sophie asked suddenly. "Is it because you're sick?" "Like my mommy was." Thomas stiffened. "Sophie, that's not—" "It's okay," Julia interrupted gently. She set down her paintbrush and turned fully toward the child. "Yes, I'm sick. I have something called lymphoma. It's different from what your mom had, but some of the medicines are the same. The medicine is very strong. It fights the bad cells in my body, but it also makes my hair fall out. So I wear pretty scarves instead." Sophie took a tentative step forward. "Does it hurt?" Julia considered this, appreciating the child's directness. "Sometimes, but not all the time." "Mommy's hurt all the time at the end." Sophie's voice was matter-of-fact, though her eyes shimmered with memories. "She tried to pretend it didn't, but I knew." Thomas placed a protective hand on his daughter's shoulder, but Julia held Sophie's gaze. "I'm sorry about your mom. She must have been very brave." Sophie nodded solemnly. "She was the bravest. Daddy says I'm brave too." "I can see that." Julia smiled, a real smile that reached her tired eyes. "Would you like to watch me paint, or maybe you'd like to try—" Sophie's face lit up. She glanced at her father for permission, then immediately settled on the ground beside Julia's easel when Thomas nodded. For the next hour, Thomas watched in amazement as his daughter, his quiet, guarded daughter, chatted animatedly with Julia about colors and techniques and the stories behind each painting. Julia patiently answered every question, occasionally demonstrating a brushstroke or explaining why she chose certain colors. Despite her obvious fatigue, she seemed energized by Sophie's enthusiasm, her hands steadier than they'd been earlier. "Can you teach me to paint clouds?" Sophie asked suddenly. "Real clouds, the puffy kind. Mom said they were the hardest thing to paint, but she was going to teach me when I got older. She said clouds are special because they touch both heaven and earth." A charged silence fell between them. Thomas held his breath, waiting for Julia's response. This was the first time Sophie had mentioned such a specific memory of Catherine in over a year. "Clouds are tricky," Julia agreed softly, "but not impossible. Nothing worth doing is ever impossible. Would you like me to show you a few tricks?" Sophie nodded eagerly. Julia tore a clean sheet from her sketchbook and began a simple demonstration, guiding Sophie's hand through basic cloud formations. Thomas watched transfixed as his daughter leaned in close, her focus absolute. Something was happening here, something important, but he couldn't quite name it. Relief mingled with unease in his chest. That's beautiful, Sophie, Julia praised as the child created her first recognizable cloud. Your mom was right, you have natural talent. Can I make one for her? Sophie asked. To send to heaven. Julia met Thomas's gaze over the child's head, a silent question in her eyes. He gave a small nod. I think that's a wonderful idea, Julia told Sophie. Art is the best way to send messages to people we love but can't see anymore. As Sophie worked intently on her cloud picture, Thomas pulled Julia aside. Thank you, he whispered. She hasn't talked about Catherine like that in a long time. She's an extraordinary child. Julia's voice was soft. You've done well with her. Thomas shook his head. I'm just trying to keep us both afloat. Some days are better than others. That's all any of us can do. As they prepared to leave, Sophie proudly showed Julia her finished cloud picture. It's for Mom. Do you think she'll like it? I think she'll love it, Julia assured her. And why don't you keep it safe at home? And maybe next time you visit, you can show me another cloud you've practiced. Sophie's face brightened at the promise of a next time. Yes, and maybe you can teach me more tricks. I'd be honored. Thomas carefully tucked Sophie's artwork into his portfolio case, treating it with the same respect he would a valuable contract. As they walked away, Sophie turned and waved enthusiastically. Julia waved back, her smile fading only when they were out of sight. She sank onto her stool, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion. 2 days later, Julia sat in a sterile examination room, waiting for her oncologist. The paper covering the examination table crinkled beneath her as she shifted uncomfortably. Dr. Sharma entered with Julia's file, her expression neutral but kind. How are you feeling this week, Julia? Good days and bad days. More bad than good lately. Dr. Sharma nodded as she examined Julia's blood work results. Your counts are lower than I'd like to see. The aggressive treatment plan is taking its toll. We might need to consider reducing the dosage. No, Julia's response was immediate. We stick to the plan. I need this to work. Dr. Sharma studied her patient carefully. There's something different about you today. A new determination. Julia thought about Sophie's cloud painting, about Thomas's quiet strength, about the art show that now seemed like a tangible goal rather than an impossible dream. I just need more time, she said simply. Time for what? To finish what I've started. Later that afternoon, Thomas returned to South Congress alone. He found Julia packing up her display earlier than usual, her movements slow and deliberate, each gesture clearly requiring effort. Bad day, he asked, immediately moving to help her. Julia nodded, too tired to pretend otherwise. Chemo tomorrow. I like to rest before battle. Thomas continued, helping her pack, handling each painting with care. Have you thought more about the art show? I have. Julia secured the last of her supplies in her worn portfolio bag. If you're serious about it, I'd like to try, but I have conditions. Name them. This isn't about my illness, it's about my art. No sad cancer girl narratives, no pity purchases. If people buy my work, it's because they see value in it, not because they feel sorry for me. Thomas nodded. Agreed. And whatever money is made, I want to pay you back for the show costs, even if it takes time. Julia, I mean it, Thomas. I won't be a charity case. I can't. He recognized the steel beneath her fatigue, the same stubborn pride that had kept him from accepting help when Catherine was dying. The pride that had ultimately robbed them both of community when they needed it most. How about this, he suggested. You focus on creating. Let me handle the logistics. We'll keep accurate records of all expenses, and you can pay back whatever you want whenever you can. But your health comes first always. Julia considered this, then nodded slowly. One more thing. I need to know why you're really doing this. The truth. Thomas looked away, gathering his thoughts. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost confessional. When Catherine was diagnosed, we had everything insurance saving support. But I was so afraid of losing her that I tried to control everything. I thought if I managed it all perfectly, she'd survive. When she didn't, I felt like I'd failed her. He met Julia's gaze again. Helping you won't bring her back, I know that. But maybe it can remind Sophie that not everything beautiful gets destroyed. Maybe it can show her that sometimes we can make a difference even when we couldn't before. Julia absorbed his words, searching his face. And what if I die anyway? What will that teach her? That trying matters. That human connection matters even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. For the first time since they'd met, Julia reached out and took Thomas's hand in hers. The gesture was brief but significant, an acknowledgement of shared understanding. Thursday at 2, she said, my treatment, University Medical Center. If you're serious about this partnership, you should see what you're investing in. The following day, Thomas sat in his corner office overlooking downtown Austin, staring at the conference room where his executive team had gathered. Through the glass walls, he could see his marketing director making an impassioned argument, complete with animated gestures and furrowed brows. Thomas knew exactly what was being said without hearing a word. The art show was a risk, a distraction, an unnecessary expense, a CEO's vanity project born from personal emotions rather than business sense. His assistant Diane knocked lightly on his doorframe. They're waiting for you, sir. Thomas nodded, gathered his tablet, and walked into the conference room. The conversation halted abruptly. I've reviewed everyone's concerns, he began without preamble. I understand the hesitation. This isn't our usual approach. Marcus, his CFO and oldest friend, leaned forward. Thomas, it's not just the expense, it's the precedent. If we start sponsoring individual artists based on personal connections. This isn't about personal connections, Thomas interrupted, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. It's about our new headquarters making a statement in the community. 27 blank walls. We either fill them with soulless corporate art that no one remembers, or we create something meaningful. There are established galleries, vetted artists, and we'll include them too, but a Julia Reed will be our featured artist. Samantha, the head of PR, cleared her throat. I've researched her work. She's talented, no question, but unknown. No formal exhibitions, no gallery representation, just a street vendor. Thomas pulled up Julia's portfolio on the room's main screen photographs he'd taken of her work with her permission. Look at these pieces. Really look at them. This isn't just talent. This is raw emotion translated into visual storytelling. This is exactly the impression we want to make on clients and partners. The room fell silent as his team studied the images. Thomas could see the reluctant appreciation in their expressions, the professional recognition of something exceptional. Marcus sighed. Catherine would have loved her work. It was a low blow invoking his late wife's name in a business discussion. Thomas felt his jaw tighten. This isn't about Catherine. Isn't it? Marcus's voice softened. You've been different since you met this artist. More like your old self. That's not a bad thing, Thomas. We've all been worried about you. Thomas hadn't expected this turn in the conversation. He'd prepared for budget objections, marketing concerns, logistical arguments, not concern for his emotional well-being. My personal life isn't relevant to this decision. It is when you're the face of this company, Samantha said gently. When you lost Catherine, we all understood you needed time. But it's been 3 years, and until now, you've been just existing, going through the motions, brilliant as ever, but distant. Thomas looked around the table, suddenly seeing his executive team not just as colleagues, but as the friends they'd become over the years. People who had sent food when Catherine died, who had taken turns picking up Sophie from school during the worst days, who had given him space to grieve without ever truly leaving him alone. The art show happens, he said finally. Budget concerns are valid. We'll scale appropriately, seek sponsorships, make it financially sound. But Julia Reed will be our featured artist. The team exchanged glances, then nodded in collective agreement. And Thomas, Marcus added, as the meeting adjourned, we're glad to see you caring about something again. Just be careful. Her prognosis is not up for discussion. Thomas cut him off firmly. Focus on the art show. Thursday arrived with ominous clouds gathering over Austin, the air heavy with impending rain. Thomas sat in his car outside the University Medical Center, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. He hadn't been inside an oncology ward since Catherine's final days. The thought of walking through those doors again made his chest constrict, memories threatening to overwhelm him. His phone chimed with a text from Sophie's art camp counselor. Counselor, a photo of his daughter proudly holding up a painting of clouds. The simple joy in her face gave him strength. He got out of the car and headed inside. The oncology department was exactly as he remembered, too bright, too quiet, too sterile. The scent of antiseptic triggered a cascade of memories. Catherine's brittle laughter as she lost her hair. The way she insisted on wearing her favorite earrings even when she could barely lift her head. The moment the light left her eyes while he was momentarily out of the room getting coffee. Thomas forced himself to keep walking until he reached the treatment room. Julia sat in a recliner, an IV dripping clear liquid into her arm. She looked smaller, somehow more vulnerable than she did on South Congress with her easel and paints. Her eyes were closed, her breathing measured, as if she was focusing on something far away. He hesitated in the doorway, suddenly feeling like an intruder. This was too intimate, too personal. He shouldn't be here. Julia opened her eyes as if sensing his presence. "You came." Surprise colored her voice. "I said I would." Thomas took tentative steps into the room, hyper-aware of the medical equipment, the familiar beeping monitors, the other patients in various stages of treatment. Most people don't. They say they will, but the reality of chemo rooms scares them away. She gestured to the empty chair beside her. "It's okay to be scared. I'm scared every time." Thomas sat down, noticing how her hands trembled more severely today. "Does it hurt?" "Not the way you'd think. It's cold mostly, like ice water in your veins. The real fun comes later, the nausea, the bone pain, the crushing fatigue." She studied his face. "This is hard for you, being here." "Catherine," he admitted. "She had her treatments here. Different floor, same hospital." Julia nodded, understanding. "You don't have to stay." "I want to." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the occasional quiet conversation between nurses and patients the only sounds. Thomas noticed Julia had brought a small sketchbook. It lay open on her lap, a half-finished drawing visible. "What are you working on?" he asked, grateful for the distraction. "Just ideas for the show." She turned the sketchbook toward him. "I'm thinking of a series, paper airplanes as metaphors for different stages of hope." The sketch showed a child releasing dozens of paper airplanes from a hilltop, each one carrying a different message. In the distance, the planes transformed into birds. "It's beautiful," Thomas said quietly. "Sophie would love it." "She's my inspiration for this one. Her cloud painting made me think about messages we send into the universe without knowing if they'll ever reach their destination." Thomas thought about all the things he still wanted to tell Catherine about Sophie's growth, about the emptiness that lingered in their home, despite his best efforts, about the guilt he carried for not being in the room when she took her final breath. "Do you think they do?" he asked. "Reach their destination?" Julia considered this. "I don't know, but I think the act of sending them matters, the hope, the intention. Maybe that's enough." A nurse approached to check Julia's IV and vitals, prompting a brief pause in their conversation. Thomas noticed how Julia winced slightly when the nurse adjusted the needle in her arm, though she quickly masked her discomfort. "You don't have to pretend it doesn't hurt," he said after the nurse left. "Not with me. Force of habit. People get uncomfortable around pain they can't fix." "I'm already uncomfortable," Thomas admitted with a small smile. "Might as well be honest." Julia laughed, a genuine sound that momentarily transformed her tired face. "Fair enough. In that case, I feel awful. My body feels like it's being poisoned, which it technically is. I'm terrified every time that this will be the treatment that breaks me. And I'm angry that my art degree and all my plans mean nothing in the face of cancer cells that don't give a damn about my potential." The raw honesty hung between them. Thomas didn't offer platitudes or solutions, just his presence and attention. "Catherine was angry too," he said finally. "Not at the beginning, but toward the end. She'd been so positive, so determined to beat it, that when she finally realized she wouldn't, the anger nearly consumed her. She made me promise not to let Sophie remember her that way." "Did you keep that promise?" "I try. I tell Sophie stories about her mother's strength, her creativity, her love. But sometimes I wonder if I'm creating a saint instead of preserving the memory of a woman, flaws, anger, and all." "Children can handle more truth than we give them credit for," Julie observed. "Sophie seems remarkably perceptive." "She is, sometimes too much so. She notices everything, feels everything deeply." "Catherine was the same way." Thomas hesitated, then added, "She likes you, Sophie, I mean. She hasn't connected with anyone like that since her mother died." A shadow crossed Julia's face. "Thomas, you know my situation. 50-50 odds at best, and that's if I can continue treatment. I don't want Sophie to get attached to someone she might lose too late. She already asked if we could visit you again tomorrow." And what did you tell her? That you'd be resting after your treatment, that maybe next week if you're feeling up to it. Julia closed her sketchbook, her hands still trembling. I don't want to hurt her. Or you. Life hurts, Julia. Loving people hurts. Losing them hurts. But the alternative, not connecting, not caring, hurts worse. I learned that the hard way. The treatment session continued for another hour, during which Thomas made phone calls about the upcoming art show while staying by Julia's side. He arranged for transportation companies to donate services for artwork delivery, convinced a catering friend to provide refreshments at cost, and began compiling a guest list of influential art collectors and local media. As the final medication dripped into Julia's veins, he could see her energy flagging, her responses becoming slower, her eyes struggling to stay open. I should take you home, he offered when the nurse finally removed the IV. I can call a rideshare, it's what I usually do. Not today. Too exhausted to argue, Julia let Thomas help her into a wheelchair hospital policy for discharge and then into his car. She gave him directions to a small apartment complex in East Austin, far from the trendy, renovated areas where rent remains somewhat affordable. When they arrived, Thomas insisted on helping her inside despite her weak protests. Her apartment was small but filled with light, a studio with a sleeping area partially separated by a bookshelf. Paintings leaned against every wall, some finished, others in various stages of completion. Art supplies occupied most of the available surface space. It was chaotic but vibrantly alive, a physical manifestation of Julia's mind. Sorry for the mess, she murmured as he guided her to a worn sofa. Wasn't expecting company. It's perfect, Thomas said, meaning it. After the sterility of the hospital, the creative chaos felt refreshing, real. Do you need anything, water, food, medication? Julia pointed to a small basket on the kitchen counter. Anti-nausea pills. I should take one now before it gets bad. Thomas fetched the medication and a glass of water, then hesitated. Will you be okay alone? Is there someone I should call? There's no someone, Julia admitted, swallowing the pill. But I'll be fine. I've done this many times before. Thomas looked around the apartment again, noticing now the single mug in the dish rack, the lack of photographs, the solitary existence evident in every corner. For the first time, he truly understood her isolation, not just from health or financial challenges, but from the fundamental human connections most people took for granted. I'm going to bring you dinner later, he decided. Something bland that won't upset your stomach, and I'll check in tomorrow. Thomas, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. Friends help friends through tough days. Julia looked like she wanted to argue but lacked the energy. Instead, she asked, are we friends now? I think we could be, if you want. A small smile touched her lips as her eyes drifted closed. I'd like that. I don't have many friends left. Cancer tends to clarify who's in it for the long haul. Thomas quietly arranged her medication bottles in order of when she might need them, placed a fresh glass of water within reach, and made sure her phone was charged and accessible. As he prepared to leave, he noticed a stack of bills on her small desk, more past due notices, payment plans, threatening letters from collection agencies. The amount owed made his stomach clench, nearly $50,000, with more accumulating with each treatment. He looked back at Julia, now sleeping on the sofa, her body fighting a battle on multiple fronts. Without her fierce energy and determination animating her features, she looked fragile young, someone who should be starting her life, not fighting for it. In that moment, Thomas made a decision. The art show wouldn't just be about featuring emerging talent or filling his company's walls. It would be about saving Julia Reed's life. Over the next 2 weeks, a rhythm developed between them. Thomas would check on Julia the day after her treatments, often bringing Sophie along on the better days. Sophie and Julia would paint together while Thomas handled emails or calls, comfortable in each other's company, despite the circumstances that had brought them together. On good days, Julia continued to set up her display on South Congress, though now Thomas often joined her during lunch breaks, bringing food and caffeine-free iced tea. Sometimes they talked about art or business. Other times they simply sat in companionable silence, watching tourists and locals navigate the eclectic street. You know, people are starting to talk, Julia said one afternoon, gesturing at a group of regular vendors who watched them with knowing smiles. About what? The tech executive who's fallen for the dying artist. It's like a Nicholas Sparks novel. Thomas's fingers stilled on his keyboard. They hadn't acknowledged the growing connection between them, The way their conversations had become the highlight of his days, how Julia had started looking for him each morning. "Would that be so terrible?" he asked quietly. "It would be cruel to Sophie. To you. You've already lost one person to illness. You don't need stop." The word came out sharper than intended. "You don't get to decide what I need or what Sophie needs." Julia looked away, blinking back sudden tears. "I'm just being realistic." "No, you're being afraid. There's a difference." "Of course I'm afraid." The emotion in her voice drew glances from passers-by. She lowered her voice. "I'm afraid of dying. I'm afraid of living. I'm afraid of caring about you and Sophie and then leaving you both. I'm afraid of the pain in your eyes every time you look at me and remember Catherine. I'm terrified of becoming another ghost in your house." Thomas reached across the small display table and took her hand thin cold despite the summer heat, but still capable of creating beauty. "I'm afraid too," he admitted, "but I've spent 3 years living in fear, and it's a terrible way to exist. Sophie deserves to see me trying again, even if it's messy, even if it hurts. And you deserve to be seen not as a disease or a charity case or a reminder of what I've lost, but as Julia Reed, the extraordinary artist who makes my daughter smile again." Julia didn't pull her hand away, but doubt still clouded her eyes. "And when the treatment stopped working, when I can't get out of bed, when I'm not the vibrant, fighting woman you see now, then we adapt. Together." The word hung between them together, heavy with possibility and terror. Before Julia could respond, her phone rang with a call from her oncologist's office. Thomas watched as she listened to her expression shifting from concern to shock. "Yes," she said finally. "I understand. Thank you." She ended the call, staring at the phone in her hand. "Bad news," Thomas asked, bracing himself. "My insurance is denying coverage for my next 3 treatments." "Something about experimental protocols and network restrictions?" Her voice was oddly calm, almost detached. "That's $30,000 I don't have." "We'll figure it out." Thomas was already making mental calculations, his savings assets he could liquidate quickly. "There's nothing to figure out." Julia began packing up her display with mechanical precision. "This is it, the cosmic joke punchline. Graduate art school, get cancer, and find someone who might actually care about you, run out of money, die anyway." "Julia, stop. Let me help." "You can't fix this, Thomas." "I can pay for the treatments." She froze, her eyes flashing with sudden anger. "No, absolutely not. It's just money. It's not just money, it's dignity. It's independence. It's not becoming someone's project or burden or charity case. That's not what you are to me." "Then what am I to you, Thomas, really?" The question cut through the afternoon air, demanding truth. Thomas felt the weight of Sophie's future, Catherine's memory, his own guarded heart. But looking at Julia, fierce, even in her fear, talented beyond measure, somehow both fragile and indomitable, he knew the answer. "You're the woman who's teaching my daughter to paint clouds to send to her mother in heaven. You're the artist who sees beauty where others see only struggle. You're someone I think about when I wake up and before I fall asleep. You're not Catherine, and I'm not trying to replace her. You're Julia, and I think I'm falling in love with you." The confession stunned them both. Julia took a step back, her hands gripping her portfolio case like a shield. "You can't love me? It's not fair to either of us. Life isn't fair. Cancer isn't fair. Losing Catherine wasn't fair. But finding you in the middle of all that unfairness feels like the universe finally got something right." A tear slipped down Julia's cheek. "I can't accept your money." "Then accept a loan, or accept it as an advance on paintings you'll create for the company. Or tell me to go to hell, but let me help you anyway, because that's what people who care about each other do." Julia looked away, conflict evident in every line of her body. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'll accept it as an advance. Every penny will be paid back through my work." She met his eyes again. "And Thomas, I'm not promising you a future I can't guarantee, but I'm not pushing you away anymore either." It wasn't a declaration of love, it wasn't even a promise. But for now it was enough, a paper airplane of possibility launched into an uncertain sky. The next Saturday, Thomas brought Sophie to Julia's apartment with supplies for an art day. Julia had been feeling stronger, the week's treatment less debilitating than previous ones. They spread tarps on her small living room floor, set up easels, and prepared to paint together. "What should we paint?" Sophie asked, arranging her brushes with the seriousness of a surgeon preparing instruments. "Anything you want," Julia told her. "Art has no rules." "Daddy says everything has rules," Sophie replied, glancing at her father. Thomas raised his hands in mock surrender. "Business has rules, art is different." "Maybe we could all paint the same subject, but in our own ways," Julia suggested. "Like paper airplanes." Sophie's face lit up. "Yes, like in your painting with the girl throwing one into the sunset." "Exactly. Each of us can paint paper airplanes, but they can mean something different to each of us." They worked in comfortable concentration, Julia occasionally offering guidance to Sophie or commenting on Thomas's unexpected talent for perspective. The afternoon light streamed through the windows, casting a golden glow over their impromptu studio. Sophie finished first, proudly holding up her creation, dozens of colorful paper airplanes, flying from Earth to a bright yellow sun, with messages written on each one. "They're carrying words to heaven," she explained, "so Mommy can read them." "What do they say?" Julia asked gently. "This one says, 'I miss you.' This one says, 'I'm learning to paint.' This one says, 'I'm not sad all the time anymore.'" Sophie pointed to one at the top of the page. "And this one says, 'I met someone who makes clouds like you did.'" Thomas and Julia exchanged glances over Sophie's head, both moved by the child's honest expression of her healing process. "It's beautiful, Sophie," Julia said. "I think your mom would love knowing you're sending her messages." "Your turn, Daddy," Sophie insisted. Thomas turned his canvas around. His style was more realistic than either Julia's or Sophie's, a single paper airplane soaring above turbulent waters, heading toward calmer seas ahead. The detail was impressive for someone who claimed not to be artistic. "The airplane is Sophie and me," he explained. "The water was rough for a long time after we lost Catherine, but we're heading somewhere better now." Julia's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she revealed her own painting, three figures on a hillside, each releasing a paper airplane into a sky filled with possibilities. Though the figures were rendered in her characteristic abstract style, there was no mistaking the man, the child, and the woman standing together. Sophie studied it intently. "Is that us?" "What do you think?" Julia deflected, suddenly uncertain about the presumption in her art. "I think it's a family," Sophie declared with the certainty of childhood. "But you gave us wings." "Hidden wings," Thomas corrected softly, his eyes never leaving Julia's face. "The kind you only see when the light hits just right." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities, until Sophie broke the spell by announcing she was hungry. They cleared away the art supplies and moved to Julia's small kitchen to prepare a simple dinner together. As they worked side by side, Julia marveled at how natural it felt, this temporary family unit they'd created. Thomas chopping vegetables while discussing the art show logistics, Sophie setting the table with exaggerated care. The easy conversation, the occasional laughter, the sense of belonging she'd forgotten was possible. For a few precious hours, cancer didn't define her existence. She wasn't a patient or a charity case or a tragic figure. She was simply Julia, artist, teacher, friend, and maybe something more. Later, after Sophie had fallen asleep on Julia's sofa, exhausted from their creative day, Thomas and Julia sat on her small balcony watching the Austin skyline shimmer in the distance. "Thank you for today," Julia said quietly, "for bringing normalcy back into my life." "Is that what we are, normal?" Thomas smiled, the expression softening the worry lines that had become permanent fixtures on his face over the past 3 years. "No," Julia admitted. "Nothing about this situation is normal. But it feels right somehow, even when it shouldn't. Because of my money, because of your cancer, because of Catherine. All of it. The timing, the circumstances, the improbability." Thomas was quiet for a moment, considering her words. "I used to believe life followed logical patterns. If you worked hard, you succeeded. If you loved fully, you were loved in return. If you did everything right, things would turn out okay. And now I think life is more like art, chaotic, unpredictable, sometimes painful, but capable of unexpected beauty in the midst of disorder." He turned to face her. "You taught me that you know. You and your paper airplanes launched into uncertain skies." Julia felt a familiar tightness in her chest, not from illness this time, but from emotion too large to contain. The art show is in 3 weeks. What if I can't finish enough pieces? What if no one comes? What if everyone just sees me as that poor cancer girl instead of an artist? Then we adapt. But I don't think that will happen. Your work speaks for itself, Julia. It always has. She wanted to believe him, wanted to see herself through his eyes as someone worthy and capable despite her illness. The doubt must have shown on her face because Thomas reached out and gently turned her chin until she met his gaze. When Catherine was diagnosed, we had a choice to define her by her cancer, or to remember she was still herself with the same dreams and talents and flaws as before. The disease was part of her story, but it wasn't her whole story. It's the same with you. Julia leaned into his touch, allowing herself this moment of connection. The difference is that Catherine had you. I've been fighting alone. Not anymore, Thomas said simply. Not if you don't want to be. The implication hung in the air between them. Not a declaration, not a promise of forever, but an offer of companionship for however long any more might be. Inside the apartment, Sophie stirred on the sofa, murmuring something in her sleep. The sound broke the moment, reminding them both of the complications, the responsibilities, the potential for both joy and heartbreak in the path they were considering. One day at a time, Julia suggested, her voice barely above a whisper. No promises beyond that. Thomas nodded, understanding the boundaries she needed. One day at a time. As he gathered a sleepy Sophie to head home, Julia pressed the paper airplane painting into his hands. For your office. A reminder that sometimes the most important journeys begin with the simplest acts of hope. Thomas accepted the gift, recognition of its significance evident in his eyes. I'll hang it where I can see it every day. After they left, Julia stood in her suddenly quiet apartment, surrounded by evidence of their day together. Paintbrushes soaking in jars, canvases drying on easels, dinner dishes stacked neatly in the sink. For the first time in months, the silence felt temporary rather than permanent, a pause rather than an ending. She reached for her sketchbook and began planning her next piece for the show, a large canvas depicting paper airplanes transforming into birds, in mid-flight symbols of messages becoming messengers, hope becoming reality. Outside her window, Austin continued its Saturday night revelry, oblivious to the small miracle that had occurred in her apartment that day, the miracle of 3 broken people finding unexpected healing in each other's company. A tech executive haunted by loss, a child searching for mothering, and an artist fighting for her life, an unlikely family formed through chance, choice, and courage. Julia worked into the night, her hands steady despite her fatigue, each brushstroke an act of defiance against the disease that threatened to define her. By morning, she had sketches for 12 new pieces, her most ambitious collection yet, a series she privately titled Second Chances, though she would never tell Thomas that. Some hopes were still too fragile to name. The hospital walls closed in on Thomas as he sat beside Julia during her treatment, memories of Catherine superimposed over the present like a double exposure. Every beep of the medical equipment, every antiseptic scent, every hushed conversation between nurses echoed back 3 years to another woman in another chair. Yet Julia was not Catherine, her quiet determination, the sketchbook balanced on her knees even as chemicals dripped into her veins, the occasional flash of dark humor that surprised a laugh from him when he least expected it. You're staring, Julia murmured without looking up from her drawing. Sorry, just thinking. About her, no judgment in the question, just quiet understanding. Sometimes it's like walking through the same nightmare with different scenery. Julia's pencil stilled. If this is too much, it's not about what's too much for me. It's about what you need right now. The oncology nurse approached with Julia's final medication, interrupting their conversation. Thomas stepped outside while they adjusted her IV, needing a moment to collect himself. In the sterile hallway, he checked his phone, 3 missed calls from Marcus, 5 urgent emails about the upcoming board meeting, a text from Sophie's art camp counselor with another photo of cloud paintings. Life continuing its relentless pace while time seemed suspended in the treatment room. Marcus's voicemail was terse. Board's calling an emergency meeting. Rumors about your distraction are circulating. Hamilton is making noise about leadership concerns. Call me. Thomas felt a familiar pressure building behind his temples, the weight of expectations, responsibilities, the company he'd built from nothing now questioning his judgment, because he dared to care about something beyond quarterly projections. He'd faced down corporate raiders and hostile takeovers, navigated economic downturns and technological revolutions, but this, the simple act of helping an artist with cancer, was apparently a bridge too far for some board members. When he returned to Julia's room, she was being disconnected from the IV, her face ashen but her eyes alert. "Everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just work stuff. Nothing important." "Liar," Julia challenged gently. "CEO faces don't make that expression over nothing important." Thomas helped her gather her things, noting how her movements were more labored today, the effort to appear normal, visible in the tight line of her mouth, the careful way she placed each foot. "Board politics. Some members think I'm not focused enough on the company lately." "Because of Mary," not a question. "Because they're short-sighted. The art show is good business and good community relations. They'll see that eventually." The ride to Julia's apartment was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts. Thomas helped her inside, settling her on the sofa while he prepared tea and arranged her medications, a routine they'd established over weeks of treatment days. The domestic familiarity of these actions still surprised him, how quickly they'd fallen into patterns of care that felt both new and achingly familiar. "You should go," Julia said after taking her anti-nausea medication. "Deal with your board. I'm fine here. I'll go after you eat something. Doctor's orders." "You're not my doctor." "No, but I talked to your doctor while you were getting dressed. She said nutrition is critical after treatment, even when you don't feel like eating." Julia rolled her eyes but accepted the plain toast he offered. Sneaky CEO tactics. "Whatever works." Thomas sat beside her, scrolling through emails while she ate small, careful bites. "The gallery space is confirmed for 3 weeks from Thursday. Marketing team is finalizing the invitations tomorrow. We've got interest from local press and 3 major collectors already asking about preview access." "Why are they interested in an unknown artist?" "Because I told them you're going to be the next big thing in Texas contemporary art. And they believed you because I don't make art recommendations lightly and I've backed winners before. Or because you're Thomas Wright Tech Wonderkind turned CEO and people do what you tell them." Thomas looked up from his phone, catching the edge in her voice. "Does that bother you, that my name might open doors? I wanted to make it on my own merit, not because I have cancer and not because I know someone influential." Julia set aside her half-eaten toast. "I worked so hard to develop my style, to find my voice. Now it feels like that's secondary to my diagnosis or your connections." "Your work speaks for itself, Julia. My name might get people in the door, but your talent is what will make them remember you." Thomas closed his email app, giving her his full attention. "If you want to cancel the show." "No." Her response came quickly, surprising them both. "I need this, not just for the money, but I need to know I'll leave something behind. Something that mattered." The simplicity of her admission pierced Thomas more deeply than any elaborate declaration could have. In Catherine's final months, she'd said something similar while sorting through family photographs. "I need to know Sophie will remember me as more than just her sick mom." "You will," Thomas promised. "Your work already matters." Julia leaned her head back against the sofa cushions, exhaustion finally claiming its due. "Will you bring Sophie by this weekend? On Sunday, maybe when I'm feeling stronger. I want to show her how to blend colors for the perfect cloud shadows." "She'd like that. She talks about you constantly. Her art teacher says she's become obsessed with sky paintings." A small smile touched Julia's lips as her eyes drifted closed. "The sky is where possibilities live. It's always changing, never the same view twice. Perfect subject for someone learning that life doesn't stay fixed." Thomas watched as she slipped into sleep, her features relaxing, years falling away, until she looked impossibly young and vulnerable. The unfairness of it all, her talent, her potential, her fight pressed against his chest like a physical weight. He covered her with a light blanket, left a note about when to take her next medication, and quietly let himself out. In his car, he finally returned Marcus's call. "Emergency board meeting, really? It's Hamilton stirring the pot. Says you're emotionally compromised since meeting this artist. Claims you've missed key strategy sessions, delegated critical decisions, pushed back the Singapore expansion timeline. All of which were sound business decisions that I fully documented and justified." "I know that. Most of the board knows that. But Hamilton's angling for your chair has been since Catherine died. He thinks you're vulnerable now. Schedule the meeting tomorrow morning. I'll be there. Thomas, Marcus hesitated. Is there something real between you and this woman? Something beyond the art show and helping with her medical bills? The question hung in the air, demanding an honesty Thomas wasn't sure he was ready to confront. She matters to me. Sophie adores her. Beyond that, I don't know. And with her prognosis, just be careful. You've been through enough. The following morning, Thomas arrived at the board meeting armed with comprehensive reports on company performance, strategic initiatives, and detailed plans for the arts show, its budget projected ROI, and community impact assessment. He'd spent half the night preparing, fueled by a simmering anger at having to justify basic human decency to people who measured success solely in stock prices and market share. Richard Hamilton sat at the far end of the conference table, silver hair perfectly coiffed, bespoke suit radiating old money confidence. He'd been against Thomas from the beginning, the young tech upstart who dared disrupt established business models, who refused to play by conventional rules. That Thomas had succeeded despite Hamilton's predictions of failure only deepened the older man's resentment. Let's cut to the chase, Thomas began before Hamilton could speak. Company performance is up 12% year over year. Our new product launch exceeded projections by 18%. The Singapore expansion timeline was adjusted based on thorough market analysis that I personally reviewed and approved. Every decision I've made is documented, justified, and aligned with our 5-year strategic plan that this board unanimously approved last quarter. He slid reports across the table to each board member. As for the art show, it's a $50,000 investment that will generate an estimated $250,000 in positive PR, strengthen our community relations, and fulfill our commitment to supporting local arts, a commitment I'll remind you that features prominently in our corporate social responsibility statement. Hamilton's mouth tightened into a thin line. The issue isn't the company's performance, Thomas. It's your focus. Sources tell me you've been spending significant time with this street artist, taking her to medical appointments, bringing your daughter around her. My personal life is not board business. It is when it affects your judgment, when you're making decisions based on emotional attachment rather than business sense. Thomas felt his jaw tighten, the familiar pressure building behind his eyes. Name one decision I've made that wasn't in the company's best interest. The Henderson acquisition. You passed on it last month. They've since been bought by our competitors for a steal. I passed on Henderson because their technology was 3 years behind ours. Their talent pool was mediocre, and their valuation was inflated by creative accounting that wouldn't have survived due diligence, all of which is in the assessment report I circulated at the time. Hamilton leaned forward. And the fact that finalizing that deal would have required you to be in New York during your artist friend's treatment week had nothing to do with your decision. The room fell silent. Thomas felt a cold clarity descend, the kind that had served him well in countless negotiations and confrontations throughout his career. Let me be perfectly clear. My personal life and my professional judgment are separate matters. I have never, not once in 15 years running this company, made a business decision for personal reasons. The art show is a legitimate corporate initiative with measurable benefits. My friendship with Julia Reed is my own business. He looked around the table, meeting each board member's eyes. If anyone here has concerns about my leadership or decision-making, I welcome them to review the company's performance under my tenure. The numbers speak for themselves. Marcus cleared his throat. Thomas has my full confidence as CFO. Our financial performance has never been stronger. One by one, other board members expressed similar sentiments, leaving Hamilton isolated in his opposition. The meeting concluded with a unanimous vote minus Hamilton to proceed with the art show as planned. Afterward, Marcus pulled Thomas aside. That was a close one. Hamilton's not done, though. Let him try. I've faced worse. Just balance things okay. The company needs you. But so does Sophie. And maybe this artist, too. Thomas checked his phone, finding a text from Julia. Bad day. Rain check on weekend with Sophie. Don't want her to see me like this. The swift shift from professional battle to personal concern gave him whiplash. In one arena, he was confident, controlled, unassailable. In the other, he was navigating unfamiliar terrain without maps or guides, where success wasn't measured in market share, but in moments of connection and care. I need to go, he told Marcus. Can you handle the investor call this afternoon? Marcus nodded, understanding in his eyes. Go, I've got this. Julia's apartment was dark when Thomas arrived, blinds drawn against the afternoon sun. He found her in the bathroom, huddled on the floor near the toilet, skin clammy and gray. Without a word, he wet a washcloth with cool water and pressed it against the back of her neck, then sat beside her on the cold tile floor. You didn't have to come, she whispered, voice raw from vomiting. Yes, I did. They stayed like that for nearly an hour, Thomas periodically refreshing the cool cloth, offering small sips of water, his presence steady as waves of nausea and pain crashed through her. When the worst passed, he helped her to bed, adjusting pillows and bringing medications with quiet efficiency. This isn't what you signed up for, Julia murmured, as he drew the curtains to dim the room. I didn't sign up for anything. I chose this. There's a difference, Washis. Why would anyone choose this? Thomas sat on the edge of the bed, choosing his words carefully. After Catherine died, I built walls around Sophie and myself, kept everyone at a professional distance. It felt safer that way. And now I'm choosing to tear down those walls, to let someone in even knowing it might hurt. Because the alternative, remaining isolated, teaching Sophie that closing yourself off is the answer, that's not living. That's just existing. Julia's eyes filled with tears. I can't promise you anything, Thomas. Not a future, not stability, not even that I'll feel better tomorrow. I'm not asking for promises, just let me be here. Today. Now. The simplicity of his request seemed to settle something in her. She nodded slightly, then closed her eyes, exhaustion claiming her again. Thomas remained beside her until her breathing deepened into sleep, then quietly moved to her small kitchen table, opening his laptop to work while remaining within earshot. Hours passed as he alternated between emails and checking on Julia. When his phone rang with Sophie's daily call, he stepped onto Julia's small balcony to talk with his daughter. Is Julia feeling better, Daddy? Not today, sweetheart. The medicine that fights the bad cells sometimes makes her feel sick for a while. Like it did with Mommy. Yes, like with Mommy. A long pause followed. Daddy, is Julia going to die like Mommy did? The question hit him like a physical blow. He gripped the balcony railing, suddenly needing its support. I don't know, Sophie. The doctors are doing everything they can to make her better. That's what you said about Mommy, too. The simple observation contained such profound truth that Thomas found himself momentarily speechless. Children had an uncanny ability to cut through adult evasions to the heart of matters. You're right, I did say that about Mommy, and the doctors tried very hard, but sometimes even when everyone does everything right, people still die. I don't want Julia to die. Neither do I, sweetheart. I think, Sophie's voice grew small, I think I love her, Daddy. Is that okay? Is Mommy mad at me? Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion. No, Sophie. Mommy would never be mad about you loving someone. She would be happy that you found someone else to care about, someone who cares about you too. Can I make Julia a special painting to help her feel better? I think that would be perfect. We'll give it to her when she's feeling stronger. After finishing the call, Thomas stood on the balcony watching the Austin skyline, the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. Behind him, Julia's apartment held a woman fighting for her life. Across town, his home held a daughter beginning to open her heart again after devastating loss. And here he stood in the middle, trying to bridge both worlds while navigating his own complex emotions. His phone vibrated with an email notification. Hamilton had called another board meeting for Monday morning. The subject line read, Leadership Concerns, Continued Discussion. 3 days later, Julia felt strong enough for visitors. Sophie burst into the apartment with the energy only a 9-year-old could muster, carrying a large painting wrapped in blue tissue paper. Thomas followed more sedately, watching as his daughter carefully presented her gift. I made this to help you feel better, Sophie announced as Julia unwrapped the artwork. The painting showed 3 figures standing on a hill beneath a sky filled with impossibly fluffy clouds. Each figure clearly meant to be Thomas, Julia, and Sophie held strings attached to paper airplanes soaring upward. In the highest cloud, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, a 4th figure watched over them all. Sophie, this is beautiful. Julia breathed genuine awe in her voice. These clouds are perfect. You've mastered the technique already. I practiced every day at camp, and look. Sophie pointed to the tiny figure in the highest cloud. That's my mommy. She's watching over us from heaven. Julia's eyes met Thomas's over Sophie's head, both recognizing the magnitude of what the child had created, not just art, but a vision of family that included both her mother's memory and Julia's presence in her life. This is going in my bedroom where I can see it every morning, Julia declared. It will remind me why I need to keep fighting the bad cells. Sophie beamed with pride, then immediately began unpacking art supplies she'd brought. Can we paint together today? I'm not tired at all. The three spent the afternoon creating together, Julia teaching Sophie how to mix colors for different sky effects, while Thomas attempted a landscape with comically poor results. Their laughter filled the small apartment, transforming it from a place of illness and uncertainty to one of creativity and joy. As evening approached, Thomas ordered dinner to be delivered, insisting that Julia needed proper nutrition, despite her protest that she wasn't hungry. While they waited, Sophie explored Julia's collection of art books, fascinated by the famous paintings and artists Julia introduced her to. This one reminds me of your paper airplane paintings, Sophie observed, pointing to a Kandinsky composition. That's incredibly perceptive, Sophie, Julia said with genuine surprise. Kandinsky believed art should connect to something spiritual, something beyond what we can see with our eyes. That's what I try to do with the paper airplanes, show hope, traveling beyond our immediate sight. Is that why you like them so much, paper airplanes? Julia considered the question thoughtfully. I think I like them because they're so simple, just folded paper, but they can fly. They remind me that sometimes the simplest things can do extraordinary things if given the right chance. Like people, Sophie asked. Exactly like people. The evening continued with easy conversation and shared meals, creating a bubble of normality that felt precious precisely because of its fragility. After dinner, Sophie fell asleep on Julia's sofa, exhausted from the day's creative activities. She's completely at home here, Thomas observed quietly as he covered his daughter with a light blanket. Children adapt. They find comfort where adults see complications. It's not just adaptation. She's flourishing again. Her art teacher says she's producing work with emotion and depth that's unusual for her age. She talks more, laughs more. Thomas sat beside Julia at the small kitchen table. You've given her something I couldn't even, though I tried everything. What's that? Permission to love again without feeling disloyal to Catherine. Julia toyed with her teacup, avoiding his eyes. That's dangerous territory, Thomas. For all of us. Because of your prognosis. Partly, and partly because grief doesn't just disappear when someone new enters the picture. It morphs, hides, reemerges when you least expect it. I don't want to be a replacement for Catherine. I couldn't be even if I wanted to. No one's asking you to be. Thomas reached across the table, covering her hand with his. Catherine will always be Sophie's mother. Always be my first love, always be part of our story. But that doesn't mean our story can't continue with new chapters. Even if those chapters might be very short. Even then, the rawness of his admission hung between them, this willingness to risk heartbreak again, to choose connection despite knowing it might end in loss. Julia turned her hand beneath his, interlacing their fingers in silent acceptance of whatever uncertain future awaited them. The weekend passed in similar fashion, creating a template of what their lives might look like together. Art and laughter, quiet conversations, shared meals. Sophie's exuberance balanced by Julia's gentle guidance and Thomas's steady presence. For brief stretches, cancer became background noise rather than the dominant narrative. Monday morning shattered the idyll. Thomas received a text from his assistant while dropping Sophie at school. Hamilton has proxy votes from Westbrook and Chen. Emergency board meeting in 30 minutes. Marcus says come immediately. Simultaneously, Julia called with news from her doctor. Her recent blood work showed concerning trends, possibly indicating the current treatment protocol was losing effectiveness. They needed to discuss alternatives immediately. Go to your meeting, Julia insisted when he offered to accompany her to the oncologist. This is just a consultation, not treatment. I can handle it. I can reschedule. Thomas, whatever's happening at your company sounds serious. I've been handling doctor appointments alone for months before I met you. I'll be fine. Reluctantly, Thomas headed to the office, arriving just as the board meeting was called to order. Hamilton sat with unmistakable confidence, flanked by two board members who typically supported Thomas's leadership. The betrayal stung, though Thomas had faced worse corporate maneuvers throughout his career. "I'll keep this brief," Hamilton began. "Recent events have raised significant concerns about Thomas's ability to maintain the objective leadership this company requires. His personal entanglements have created a conflict of interest that compromises his decision-making." "What specific decisions are you questioning, Richard?" Thomas kept his voice level, years of boardroom battles having taught him that visible anger only weakened his position. "The Singapore expansion delay, the Henderson acquisition pass, and most recently your refusal to attend the Tokyo conference next week, a critical opportunity to secure Asian market partnerships. All decisions I've thoroughly documented and justified. The Tokyo conference conflicts with our quarterly strategy review, which I deemed more important to attend. And the fact that it also conflicts with your artist friend's scheduled treatments is merely coincidental." The direct attack confirmed what Thomas had suspected. Hamilton had been investigating his personal life, gathering ammunition. The violation felt both professional and deeply personal. "My personal schedule is not board business unless it impacts company performance," which it has not. Hamilton smiled thinly. "We disagree, which is why I've called for a vote of confidence in your leadership. With proxy votes from directors Westbrook and Chen, we have sufficient numbers to force the issue." Thomas scanned the faces around the table, some uncomfortable, some calculating, a few openly supportive. Marcus looked furious but constrained by corporate governance protocols that even he couldn't circumvent. "Before we vote," Thomas said, standing to address the full board, "I'd like to make one thing absolutely clear. This company has been my life's work. I've built it from nothing into an industry leader. Our stock price has quadrupled under my leadership. Our innovation pipeline is the strongest in the sector." He placed both hands on the table, leaning forward. "But if being a compassionate human being is incompatible with leading this company, then perhaps it's not a company worth leading." The room fell silent, the gauntlet thrown. Hamilton's expression flickered between triumph and uncertainty. He'd expected Thomas to fight for his position, not question the values of the organization itself. "The vote stands," Hamilton finally said. "All in favor of removing Thomas Wright as CEO effective immediately." "Point of order," Marcus interrupted. "The bylaws require written notice of leadership votes at least 48 hours in advance, unless there's evidence of financial malfeasance or ethical violations. Neither has been presented here." A procedural debate erupted, giving Thomas a temporary reprieve. As lawyers were consulted and bylaws examined, his phone vibrated with a text from Julia. "New treatment options limited. Insurance denying experimental protocol. Standard protocol failing. Need to talk when you can." The dual crises, professional and personal, crystallized something in Thomas. For 3 years since Catherine's death, he'd poured himself into the company, using work as both shield and purpose. He'd been a good father to Sophie, but an emotionally distant one, going through the motions of parenting without fully engaging his heart. Meeting Julia had cracked that careful armor, forcing him to confront not just her mortality, but his own emotional withdrawal. Now facing potential loss on multiple fronts, he found clarity where confusion had reigned. As the procedural debate wound down with the determination that proper notice would be required before a confidence vote could proceed, Thomas made his decision. "This meeting is adjourned until proper notice requirements are met," he announced, gathering his materials. "In the meantime, I'll be taking personal leave for the remainder of the week. Marcus will serve as acting CEO during my absence." Hamilton's face darkened with fury. "Running away, Thomas, proving my point about your priorities." "Not running, Owen, running toward what matters." Thomas met each board member's gaze one final time. "When we reconvene, you'll need to decide what kind of company we want to be. One that values only profit, or one that remembers the humans behind the balance sheets." He left the boardroom without looking back, texting Julia as he walked to his car. "Coming now. Whatever you need, we'll figure it out together." For the first time in years, the weight of corporate expectations lifted from his shoulders. Whether temporary or permanent, the relief was profound. He had chosen connection over isolation, vulnerability over safety, humanity over corporate identity. Whatever came next, he would face it not as CEO Thomas Wright, but simply as Thomas' father friend and a man learning to love again in the shadow of loss. The corridor outside Dr. Sharma's office felt endless as Thomas strode toward the oncology department, his footsteps echoing against sterile walls. 3 days had passed since Julia's text about treatment options, 3 days of frantic research, desperate phone calls, and sleepless nights. He'd spoken with specialists across the country, leveraged every connection called in favors from medical school friends. The weight of his company's uncertain future had become secondary to this more immediate battle. He found Julia sitting alone in the consultation room reviewing documents spread across the small table. She looked up when he entered, surprise flickering across her face. "You didn't have to come. I told you I could handle this." "I know you can handle it. That doesn't mean you should have to." Thomas took the chair beside her, scanning the paperwork, medical jargon, treatment protocols, insurance denials, and astronomical cost estimates. "What are we looking at?" "Standard protocols effectiveness is diminishing. My markers are trending in the wrong direction." Julia's clinical tone couldn't disguise the fear beneath her words. "There's an experimental immunotherapy trial at MD Anderson in Houston. Dr. Sharma thinks I'd be a good candidate, but my insurance won't cover experimental treatments. The out-of-pocket cost is roughly $175,000. The figure hung in the air between them both, impossible and coldly precise. For Thomas, it represented a small fraction of his net worth. For Julia, it might as well have been the moon. "I've been approved for a compassionate care grant that would cover about 20%. I'm applying for additional assistance programs, but most have wait lists or income requirements that disqualify artists who technically own their own businesses." Her voice remained steady, practical, as if discussing someone else's life. "There's also the logistical challenge. The protocol requires me to be in Houston 3 days a week for the first month, then weekly for 5 months after that." Thomas reached for her hand, finding it cold despite the warm room. "We'll make it happen. The money, the logistics, all of it. I didn't ask you here for financial rescue." Julia pulled her hand away. "I wanted to discuss what this means for the art show. If I start this treatment next week, I'll be dealing with new side effects possibly worse than before. I might not be able to finish all the pieces I planned. I might not even be able to attend. The show doesn't matter. It matters to me more than ever now." Fierce determination replaced her clinical detachment. "If this new treatment doesn't work, the show might be the only professional legacy I leave behind. I need it to be about my art, not about my illness or your charity." Thomas recognized the pride that drove her, the same stubborn independence that had initially drawn him to her. "Then we adjust. Move the date if needed. Display what you have completed. Frame the unfinished pieces as part of the artistic journey." Dr. Sharma entered before Julia could respond, carrying a thick folder of test results and treatment options. The conversation shifted to medical specifics, success rates, side effects, schedules, and contingencies. Thomas absorbed every detail, asking pointed questions that revealed the research he'd done since Julia's text. "There's one more thing we should discuss," Dr. Sharma said as the consultation neared its end. "This protocol has shown promising results, but there are no guarantees. We should be prepared for all possibilities." "You mean I should prepare to die anyway?" Julia stated flatly. "I mean we should approach this realistically. The treatment is aggressive. Your body has already endured significant stress from previous protocols. There's a possibility that even if the treatment works against the cancer, the cumulative effects on your system could create other complications." Thomas felt a familiar hollowness expanding in his chest, the same void that had opened when Catherine's doctors had delivered similar warnings. The medical terminology changed, the statistics shifted, but the fundamental truth remained unaltered. Medicine had limits, and human bodies were fragile despite their capacity for resilience. "What's the timeline without the new treatment?" Thomas asked, needing concrete parameters for the uncertainty ahead. Dr. Sharma hesitated. "Based on current progression, perhaps 6 to 8 months. With the new protocol, potentially years if you respond well. Or it could accelerate decline if your body can't tolerate the treatment. There's simply no way to predict individual responses." The drive back to Julia's apartment passed in contemplative silence. Austin's familiar landscape blurred outside the windows. Normal life continuing while their private world tilted on its axis. Thomas's mind raced through scenarios, calculations, and contingency plans. His corporate training had prepared him to analyze risks and make decisions under pressure. But this was different. This wasn't business. This was Julia's life, Sophie's heart, his own emotional survival at stake. Inside her apartment, Julia moved to her easel as if drawn by magnetic force, immediately losing herself in the canvas she'd been working on before the appointment, a large piece showing dozens of paper airplanes being transformed into birds mid-flight. "You should be resting," Thomas suggested gently. "I'll rest when I'm dead." The bluntness of her statement hung in the air. Sorry, dark humor. Cancer patient's privilege. Thomas watched as she applied careful brushstrokes, her hands steadier with a paintbrush than they ever were in daily tasks. "We haven't talked about Houston, the logistics. Because there's nothing to discuss. I can't afford it even with the grant." "I can." Julia's brush paused mid-stroke. "We've been through this. I won't take your money." "It's not charity, Julia. It's investment in a future I want to be part of." "What future? 6 months, a year if we're lucky, and if the treatment fails after you've spent all that money, then we'll have tried, together." Thomas moved to stand beside her, careful not to intrude on her creative space. "Refusing help doesn't make you stronger or more independent. It just makes you alone. I learned that lesson too late with Catherine." Julia continued, painting each stroke more aggressive than the last. "This isn't about pride. It's about facing reality. Even if you pay for everything, even if the treatment works perfectly, we're still building on borrowed time. The cancer might go into remission, but it could come back. I might get 5 good years, but then, what Sophie loses another mother figure? You lose another partner. We just delay the inevitable pain. Or you beat it completely, or we get 20 years instead of 5. Or regardless of how long we have, we spend it fully alive instead of constrained by fear." Thomas struggled to keep his voice even. "No one knows how much time they have, Julia. Catherine and I thought we had decades ahead of us. My parents thought they'd grow old together before a drunk driver ended that dream when I was 12. Tomorrow isn't guaranteed for anyone." Julia set down her brush, suddenly exhausted. "What about Sophie? She's already lost her mother. Becoming attached to me is a risk you shouldn't ask her to take." "Sophie's already attached. That ship sailed weeks ago." Thomas ran a hand through his hair, frustration building. "And children are more resilient than we give them credit for. The question isn't whether Sophie might get hurt, she will, because that's life. The question is whether we teach her to stop loving people because loving means risking loss." The truth of his words settled between them. Julia moved to her window, watching the Austin skyline as afternoon faded toward evening. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its defensive edge. "I'll accept help with the medical costs, but only as a loan against future paintings. Everything documented, everything formalized. I may be dying, but I'm not surrendering my autonomy." Agreed. Thomas sensed this wasn't the time to argue finer points. Any agreement was progress. "And I won't move in with you no matter how practical it might seem for treatment logistics. I need my own space, my own refuge. We'll figure out transportation to Houston. Maybe rent a place there for treatment weeks." Julia turned from the window, studying his face. "Your company. The board vote. What's happening with that?" "The vote's scheduled for next Monday. Marcus is holding things together until then." Thomas shrugged, the corporate drama suddenly insignificant compared to the medical battle ahead. "If they vote me out, they vote me out. The company will survive without me. And would you survive without it? That company has been your identity since before Sophie was born." The question cut deeper than Thomas expected. For 15 years, he'd been defined by his role as founder and CEO. His innovation, his leadership, his vision had shaped not just a company, but an entire segment of the tech industry. Walking away or being forced out meant redefining himself at a fundamental level. "I'd adapt, start something new maybe, or take time to focus on Sophie, on us." The words sounded right as he spoke them, as if articulating a truth he'd already accepted internally. "When Catherine died, I threw myself into work because it was the only part of my life I could control. But control is an illusion. What matters is what you build, who you love, the difference you make while you're here." Julia crossed the small apartment to stand before him, reaching up to touch his face with paint-stained fingers. For a tech CEO, you can be surprisingly philosophical. Near-death experiences tend to clarify priorities. Catherine's illness taught me that. I just didn't fully apply the lesson until now. And now I choose Sophie. I choose you. I choose whatever time we have together over everything else. Julia studied him as if memorizing his features, her artist's eye-catching nuances others might miss. You might regret that choice when reality sets in: the endless medical appointments, the side effects, the financial drain. I regret many things, Julia. Loving people has never been one of them. The simplicity of his declaration broke something open between them, a final barrier of doubt or hesitation. Julia rose on tiptoe and kissed him, a gentle meeting of lips that contained both question and answer. Thomas responded with careful restraint, conscious of her fragility, but unwilling to deny the connection they'd both been circling for weeks. When they separated, Julia rested her forehead against his chest. I'm terrified. Of the treatment. Of everything. The treatment, Ting, living, loving you, hurting Sophie, not finishing my work, all of it. Fear means you're still fighting. It's when people stop being afraid that I worry. Julia laughed softly. Is that your version of a pep talk? Sorry, I saved my inspirational speeches for quarterly earnings calls. Their shared laughter eased the tension, creating space for the practical planning that would dominate the coming days. Together, they reviewed treatment schedules, investigated housing options near MD Anderson, and calculated expenses. Thomas insisted on covering everything despite Julia's continued objections. They eventually compromised: he would pay for treatment and Houston accommodations while she maintained her Austin apartment and financial independence. By evening, exhaustion claimed them both. Thomas ordered dinner delivery while Julia rested on the sofa, her body finally registering the emotional toll of the day. They ate in comfortable silence, the weight of decisions made and battles ahead creating a strange intimacy between them. Will you stay tonight? Julia asked as Thomas cleared away the takeout containers. Just to sleep. I don't want to be alone with my thoughts. Thomas called his regular sitter to stay with Sophie, then settled beside Julia on her narrow bed, careful to give her space while remaining close enough to offer comfort. In the darkness, her voice emerged, small but determined. If I do this, if we do this, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Don't let the illness become my identity. Don't let it erase who I am as an artist, as a person. If the worst happens, tell Sophie stories about my paintings, not my cancer. Make sure she remembers that I lived, not just that I died. Thomas pulled her closer, feeling the delicate structure of her shoulder blades beneath his palm. I promise. The following morning brought sunshine streaming through Julia's windows, illuminating dust motes in golden shafts of light. Thomas woke to find Julia already at her easel, painting with focused intensity despite the early hour. She'd pulled on a loose cotton dress over her thin frame, her colorful headscarf arranged with artful precision. How long have you been up? Thomas asked, watching her work. Since dawn. I woke with this image in my head, and I needed to capture it before it faded. The canvas showed a woman standing on a precipice, paper wings attached to her arms, poised to leap into a sky filled with swirling colors. Unlike her previous work, the woman's face was clearly visible, a self-portrait rendered with unflinching honesty, showing both fear and determination. It's how I feel about this treatment, Julia explained without turning from her work. Terrified but ready to jump anyway. These aren't real wings. They're paper fragile. They might not hold, but not jumping means never knowing if they could have carried me. Thomas studied the image, struck by its raw emotional power. It's extraordinary. Your best work yet. Death clarifies artistic vision. All the pretension falls away when you're racing the clock. She added a final brushstroke, then stepped back to evaluate the piece. This one's for the show. Center wall. It'll be the focal point of the exhibition. Julia nodded, satisfaction visible in the set of her shoulders. I need to finish 3 more major pieces before treatment starts. The Houston protocol begins in 9 days, which gives me just enough time if I work efficiently. The show is scheduled for 3 weeks from Thursday. That's only 2 days after your first round of treatment. Maybe we should postpone. No. Julia's response was immediate and firm. The show happens as planned, even if I have to attend in a wheelchair, even if I can't attend at all. Julia, this isn't negotiable, Thomas. The timing matters. I need to know my work is being seen, being valued while I'm still here to know it. If we postpone, we risk it becoming a memorial rather than a celebration. The stark truth silenced his objections. Instead, Thomas focused on what he could control: the logistics of the show itself. Over breakfast, he reviewed the invitation list, marketing materials, and gallery preparations, making notes for his team to implement. Julia contributed specific ideas about lighting arrangement and presentation that revealed her deep understanding of how environment affected artistic reception. "You should have been a gallery curator," Thomas observed. "In another life, maybe. One where I finished art school debt-free and had time to build that career." Julia sipped her tea, her practical tone belying the weight of paths not taken. "No use dwelling on might-have-beens. This show is my chance to make the mark I have time to make." Thomas left mid-morning to check on Sophie and handle work matters that couldn't be delegated. The pending board vote loomed like a storm on the horizon, but his priorities had shifted so fundamentally that corporate politics felt distant and unimportant. He spent the afternoon with Sophie explaining in age-appropriate terms about Julia's new treatment in Houston. "So she'll be gone a lot?" Sophie asked, her small fingers tracing patterns on the kitchen table. "For a few days each week at first, then less often, and sometimes I'll go with her to help." Sophie considered this with the serious contemplation only children can bring to difficult news. Is this medicine better than Mommy's medicine was? The question pierced Thomas anew. It's different medicine for a different kind of sickness. The doctors have high hopes that it will help Julia get better. But they don't know for certain. "No, sweetheart, they don't know for sure." Sophie nodded, absorbing this uncertainty with remarkable composure. "Can I make her something to take to the hospital? Mommy said hospitals are boring." "That would be perfect. Maybe a special drawing for her new room in Houston." While Sophie gathered art supplies, Thomas checked his messages. Multiple calls from Marcus, a formal notice about Monday's board meeting, and a text from Julia. "Working well today. Don't want to break momentum. Rain check on dinner. Come by later if you want." He replied with encouragement, then turned his attention to Marcus's increasingly urgent messages. When he finally called his CFO, the news was worse than expected. "Hamilton secured another vote. Jensen flipped this morning. After Hamilton promised him the APAC division if you're ousted. That gives him 5 votes to our 6, assuming everyone else stays firm." "That's just it," Carter's wavering. "Says he's concerned about continuity of leadership given your personal situation." Marcus's frustration vibrated through the phone. "We need you here, Thomas, in person, making rounds, reassuring key board members, demonstrating your commitment." The request highlighted the impossible balance Thomas was attempting to maintain: corporate leader, father, supportive partner to a woman fighting for her life. For 15 years, the company had come first without question. Now, for the first time, he hesitated. "I'll come in tomorrow morning, early. Set up one-on-ones with Carter and anyone else who's wavering." "What about the Tokyo conference? Hamilton's making it a focal point. Says your refusal to attend proves you're no longer prioritizing company growth." Thomas closed his eyes, picturing the calendar conflicts. The conference dates overlapped with Julia's first treatment week in Houston, the critical initial phase that would set the tone for the entire protocol. "I can't do Tokyo, not now." "Thomas, this is your company we're talking about. 15 years of your life, everything you've built." "I know what's at stake, Marcus. Better than anyone." Thomas watched Sophie through the kitchen doorway, her small face concentrated on the drawing she was creating for Julia. "Have Samantha prep a video keynote address for Tokyo. I'll record it this week and move my strategy meetings to this weekend so I'm fully prepared for Monday's vote." After ending the call, Thomas sat motionless at his desk, the competing demands of his life stretching him in impossible directions. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd built a company that developed efficiency solutions for complex systems, yet his own life had become an equation with no optimal solution. Later that evening, after Sophie was asleep, Thomas returned to Julia's apartment. He found her still working, surrounded by canvases in various stages of completion. Music played softly in the background, classical piano, that created a cocoon of creative concentration. She acknowledged his arrival with a distracted smile, but continued painting, lost in her artistic flow. Thomas settled on her sofa with his laptop, reviewing board presentation materials, while occasionally glancing up to watch Julia work. The parallel focus created an unexpected intimacy, 2 people pursuing their separate purposes while drawing strength from each other's presence. Hours passed in this companionable silence until Julia finally set down her brushes, rolling her shoulders to release the tensions of prolonged painting. Board meeting prep, she asked, nodding toward his laptop. Defense strategy. Hamilton's gathered more support than we anticipated. What happens if you lose? Thomas closed his computer, considering the question. Contractually, I'd retain my board seat and major shareholding. Practically, I'd be sidelined from operational decisions. The company would continue with new leadership. Probably. Hamilton initially, though, he's not suited for the role long term. And how do you feel about that possibility? A month ago, it would have devastated me. Now, Thomas searched for words to express his shifted perspective. Now it feels like one door closing while others are opening. Not painless, but perhaps necessary. Julia crossed to the small kitchenette, filling a kettle for tea. That's remarkably philosophical for someone facing corporate execution. Life-threatening illness has a way of recalibrating priority, as Catherine's taught me that. Yours reinforced the lesson. I'm not sure how I feel about my cancer providing existential clarity for corporate executives. Julia's tone was light, but the underlying question was serious. I didn't mean. I know what you meant. Julia offered a tired smile. Dark humor, remember cancer patients' privilege. She brought 2 mugs of tea to the sofa, settling beside him, with careful movements that betrayed her fatigue. Have you told Sophie about the board situation? Not the details, just that there are some changes happening at work. She has enough to process with your treatment starting soon. Julia nodded, sipping her tea thoughtfully. Children understand more than we give them credit for. Sometimes the uncertainty of not knowing is worse than a difficult truth. You sound like Catherine. She insisted on honesty with Sophie, even about her prognosis. Thomas cradled his mug, the warmth grounding him in the present moment. It was one of our few arguments during her illness. I wanted to protect Sophie from the harshest realities. Catherine said we'd be protecting ourselves, not her. She was right. She usually was. The acknowledgement came without bitterness or grief, just simple recognition of a truth that had shaped his parenting ever since. Sophie's making you something to take to Houston, a drawing for your room there. Julia's expression softened. She's extraordinary, you know. Not just her artistic talent, though that's significant. Her emotional intelligence, her capacity for joy, despite what she's experienced. Those are rare qualities in anyone, let alone a child who lost her mother so young. That's Catherine's influence. And now yours. I've known her a matter of weeks, Thomas. Whatever Sophie is, she was before she met me. You've given her permission to open up again, to express herself through art without guilt, to love without fear. Thomas set down his mug, turning to face Julia directly. Which is why I need to ask you something important. Julia tensed slightly. That sounds ominous. Not ominous, just significant. Thomas took her hands in his, choosing his words carefully. If the treatment works when the treatment works, I want us to consider a future together. The 3 of us as a family. Not immediately, not without proper time to build that foundation, but as a direction we're moving toward, intentionally, not just drifting into. The directness of his proposition hung in the air between them. Julia's expression cycled through surprise, hesitation, and something that might have been hope before settling into careful neutrality. That's a significant leap from, let's try this experimental treatment and see what happens. I'm not asking for promises or commitments, just acknowledgement that we're building something worth fighting for. Something that extends beyond the art show or the treatment protocol or the immediate crisis. Julia withdrew her hands gently, creating physical distance that mirrored her emotional caution. Thomas, even if the treatment is successful, my 5-year survival odds are maybe 60% at best. Building a future with those statistics. Life doesn't come with guarantees. Catherine was healthy until suddenly she wasn't. My parents expected decades together until a random accident changed everything in seconds. Thomas maintained eye contact despite her retreat. I'm not naive about the risks. I'm choosing them consciously with full awareness of what might lie ahead. And Sophie, are you choosing those risks for her too? Sophie's already chosen you, Julia. The question is whether you're choosing us back. The challenge in his words silenced her momentarily. She rose from the sofa, moving to the window, where Austin's nighttime skyline provided a backdrop for her reflection. "I've spent 8 months preparing to die," she said finally, adjusting expectations downward, making peace with unrealized potential, learning to measure success in days rather than decades. She turned back to face him. Planning a future feels like tempting fate, like the universe will punish such presumption. Or maybe planning a future is an act of defiance, a declaration that fear won't dictate your choices. Julia smiled faintly. "You should have been a motivational speaker instead of a tech CEO. "I'm serious, Julia. Fear is the enemy, not cancer. Fear isolates. Fear diminishes. Fear prevents us from living whatever time we have to its fullest potential." And love, what does love do in this scenario? The question hung between them, genuine inquiry rather than rhetorical deflection. Thomas crossed to join her at the window closed, but not touching, offering presence without pressure. Love expands possibilities. Love creates meaning. Love makes whatever time we have, whether days or decades, worth experiencing fully. He smiled slightly. At least that's what I'm rediscovering after 3 years of existing rather than living. Julia considered his words, her artist's eyes taking in the city lights below. "I can't promise forever. I won't make commitments based on best-case scenarios that might never materialize. I'm not asking for promises, just openness to possibilities beyond immediate survival. I can manage that much." Julia turned toward him, vulnerability visible beneath her careful composure. "But we take this one step at a time. Treatment first, art show next, then we reassess based on whatever reality we're facing." Agreed. The following 9 days passed in a blur of preparation, medical, professional, and artistic. Julia painted with feverish intensity, completing the major pieces for her exhibition, while Thomas divided his time between Sophie company preparations and helping Julia arrange her Houston accommodations. He found a furnished apartment near MD Anderson, close enough for easy access during treatment days, but homey enough to provide comfort during recovery periods. Julia insisted on maintaining her independence, arranging her own transportation to Houston, and declining Thomas's offer to accompany her for the initial consultation. "I need to do this part myself," she explained, "to face it on my terms before you and Sophie become involved." Thomas respected her decision while putting contingency plans in place. A driver on call should she feel too weak to return alone, contacts at the hospital who would alert him if complications arose, a fully stocked apartment waiting for her arrival. Control where he could establish it, acceptance where he could not. Meanwhile, corporate matters demanded attention. Thomas spent 3 days at the office meeting individually with wavering board members, reviewing company performance metrics and preparing for Monday's vote. His physical presence seemed to stabilize the situation somewhat. Carter recommitted his support, and rumors suggested another director was reconsidering his alignment with Hamilton. "We might actually survive this," Marcus commented after a particularly productive strategy session. "The company will survive regardless," Thomas replied. "It's built on stronger foundations than any individual leadership. Even yours, especially mine. Great organizations outlast their founders. That's how it should be." Marcus studied him with newfound curiosity. "You've changed, Thomas. A month ago, you'd have fought this challenge like your life depended on it. A month ago, I was still defining my worth through company success. Recent events have clarified my perspective." The day before Julia's departure for Houston coincided with the final preparation day for her exhibition. Thomas arranged for the gallery space to be available exclusively for them, allowing Julia to oversee the placement and lighting of each piece. Despite her weakened state, the past week's intense work schedule had depleted her limited reserves. She moved through the space with clear vision and precise direction. "The paper airplane self-portrait needs to be centered on this wall," she instructed the installation team, "and the lighting should create subtle shadows behind it, emphasizing the sense of imminent movement." Thomas watched from the sidelines, impressed by her artistic authority and clear vision. This was Julia in her element, not a cancer patient, not someone defined by illness, but an artist directing the presentation of her life's work. The transformation was remarkable. "What do you think?" she asked when they finally had a moment alone, the installation team having departed for lunch. "It's extraordinary. The progression from isolation to connection, from solitary paper airplanes to shared flight. It tells a story without being literal." Julia nodded, pleased with his understanding. I've titled the exhibition Messages of Uncertain Delivery. Every piece represents some form of hope launched without guarantee of reception, yet launched anyway. That's the courage in it. Or the foolishness, Julia smiled, tempering the observation. Sometimes there's little difference between the two. They continued through the gallery, making final adjustments to placement and lighting. Julia grew noticeably tired as the afternoon progressed, eventually accepting Thomas's suggestion to sit while directing the final installations. Tomorrow you'll be in Houston, Thomas said as they prepared to leave the gallery, now transformed into a cohesive exhibition space that captured Julia's artistic vision perfectly. First consultation, baseline testing. The actual treatment protocol starts Thursday. Julia's clinical description couldn't disguise her underlying apprehension. 3 days of intensive infusions, then monitoring for adverse reactions. If all goes well, I return to Austin Sunday evening for 3 days before repeating the cycle. I'll bring Sophie to visit you on Saturday if you're feeling up to it. She's finished your surprise for the Houston apartment. I'd like that. Julia locked the gallery door behind them, her hand lingering on the knob. It feels strange leaving this ready for public viewing. Like I'm sending all these pieces of myself into the world without being able to explain or defend them. Art speaks for itself, yours more eloquently than most. They parted at her apartment, Julia insisting on spending her last night in Austin alone. I need to center myself before this begins, to find whatever reserves of strength I have left. Thomas respected her request while struggling against the instinct to remain close to offer protection against what lay ahead. Instead, he returned home to Sophie, focusing on his daughter's excitement about their planned weekend visit to Houston. Monday morning arrived with cloudless skies and merciless sunshine that seemed to mock the gravity of the day's dual challenges, Julia's departure for Houston and Thomas's board vote. He drove her to the station where she would catch the medical transport service, her single suitcase and portfolio case containing everything she needed for the critical week ahead. I'll call when I'm settled, Julia promised as they said goodbye. And I'll send updates after each consultation. Just focus on yourself, on healing. Everything else is secondary. Julia studied his face, memorizing details as if for a future portrait. Your board meeting is in 3 hours. You should be preparing, not playing chauffeur. I'm exactly where I need to be. She rose on tiptoe to kiss him briefly. Good luck with Hamilton. Don't let him take what you've built. The company isn't what matters today. It matters to the hundreds of people who work there, to the clients who depend on your products, to your legacy beyond whatever happens with us. Julia's gaze was unwavering. Don't sacrifice one important thing for another. Find the balance instead. With those words, she boarded the transport van, turning once to wave before the vehicle pulled away. Thomas watched until it disappeared around a corner, carrying Julia toward uncertainty, possibility, and the fight of her life. The corporate headquarters gleamed in the morning sun, its glass and steel exterior projecting confidence and permanence. Thomas entered through the main lobby rather than his private entrance, nodding to employees who looked surprised to see their CEO walking among them on this particular morning. Marcus met him at the elevator. Hamilton's already here, brought his attorney. Expected any last-minute changes to the vote count? Jensen's definitely with Hamilton. Carter's with us but nervous. The rest are holding as previously committed. Then we proceed as planned. Thomas straightened his tie as the elevator ascended. Has legal reviewed my contract terms if the vote goes against us? Thoroughly. Your equity position is secure and your board seat guaranteed for at least 2 years. The golden parachute would be substantial. Thomas nodded, mentally preparing for either outcome. As the elevator reached the executive floor, he checked his phone one last time. A text from Julia had arrived. Safely in Houston. Appointment in 1 hour. Fighting for all of us today. The boardroom fell silent as Thomas entered, 14 faces turning toward him, with expressions ranging from supportive to hostile to carefully neutral. Hamilton sat at the far end, his attorney beside him, papers arranged in precise stacks before him. Shall we begin? Thomas suggested, taking his customary seat at the head of the table. The formal proceedings commenced with corporate secretary reviews of bylaws governing leadership votes. Thomas listened attentively while observing the subtle dynamics around the table, the way certain directors avoided eye contact, how others nodded encouragement, the tension evident in tightly gripped pens and rigid postures. When the procedural elements concluded, Hamilton rose to present his case for leadership change. His arguments were well crafted if predictable concerns about Thomas's recent prioritization of personal matters over company business, specific decisions that allegedly demonstrated compromised judgment, and the Tokyo conference absence as prime example of neglected duty. This company deserves leadership that is fully committed, fully engaged, and fully focused on its continued success. Hamilton concluded, recent events make clear that Thomas Wright's priorities lie elsewhere. A moment of silence followed before Thomas stood to address the board. Instead of referring to his prepared remarks, he closed his portfolio and spoke directly. 15 years ago, I founded this company with a vision of creating technology that improves human lives. Not just more efficient systems, but solutions that allow people to focus on what truly matters: connection, creativity, purpose. We've built remarkable success on that foundation, as our financial performance clearly demonstrates. He looked around the table, meeting each director's gaze. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of my own philosophy. After my wife died, I retreated into work, measuring my worth through market share and stock prices rather than the values that inspired this company's creation. The boardroom remained silent, even Hamilton seemingly caught off guard by this unexpected approach. Recent events haven't compromised my leadership judgment. They've clarified it. They've reminded me why we build technology in the first place, not as an end unto itself, but as a means to enhance human experience. Thomas gestured toward the windows overlooking Austin. Out there are people using our products to connect with loved ones, to create art, to solve problems, to build businesses that support families. Their needs remain my priority, and this company's success remains my professional commitment. He turned back to the board. But if you believe a CEO must sacrifice personal humanity for corporate identity, then perhaps I'm no longer the right leader for this organization. If attending a conference takes precedence over supporting a loved one through life-threatening illness, then we have fundamentally different values. Thomas placed both hands on the table, leaning forward slightly. Vote your conscience today. I'll accept whatever outcome emerges. But know this: a company that forgets the humans behind the technology eventually loses its way entirely. I refuse to lead us down that path. The silence that followed felt charged with unexpected electricity. Even Hamilton seemed momentarily at a loss for response, his prepared counterarguments suddenly irrelevant to the larger philosophical question Thomas had raised. Finally, Marcus cleared his throat. Perhaps we should proceed to the vote. The formal process began, each director stating their position for the record. As the votes accumulated, Thomas maintained his composure regardless of whether each voice supported or opposed him. The final tally emerged exactly as projected: 7 in favor of retaining his leadership, 7 opposed. In the case of a tie vote, the corporate secretary announced, "The bylaws indicate the status quo remains in effect. Thomas Wright continues as chief executive officer." Hamilton's face darkened with barely contained fury. This isn't over. The concerns remain valid regardless of today's procedural outcome. You're right, Richard, Thomas agreed, surprising everyone. The concerns are valid. The tension between professional duty and personal humanity is real, which is why I'm proposing a solution. He outlined a restructured leadership approach, a 3-month period during which he would share operational duties with an executive committee while maintaining strategic oversight. The arrangement would accommodate his need for flexibility during Julia's critical treatment phase, while ensuring company operations continued without interruption. This isn't compromise, Thomas concluded. It's innovation, applying the same creative problem-solving to our leadership structure that we bring to our products. It acknowledges both human needs and corporate responsibilities without sacrificing either. The proposal generated immediate discussion, with most directors as recognizing its practical merits despite the unorthodox approach. Even Hamilton found himself unable to reasonably object to an arrangement that addressed his stated concerns while maintaining stability. By meeting's end, the board had approved the temporary leadership structure, with review scheduled after the initial 3-month period. As directors filed out, Marcus remained behind, shaking his head with grudging admiration. That was either the most brilliant corporate maneuver I've ever witnessed or pure improvisational luck. Neither, just clarity about what matters and willingness to find creative solutions. Thomas gathered his materials, suddenly eager to leave the corporate politics behind. Can you handle the implementation details? I need to call Julia. Her first consultation should be finishing about now. Go, I've got this. Marcus hesitated, then added, for what it's worth, I think Catherine would be proud of you today. Not just for saving your job, but for remembering what it's really about. Thomas nodded, unexpected emotion tightening his throat. Thanks, Marcus. That matters more than you know. In the privacy of his office, Thomas finally called Julia. The connection crackled with hospital background noise before her voice emerged sounding tired but determined. I'm officially enrolled in the trial. First treatment starts Thursday morning at 7 a.m. How are you feeling about it? Terrified, hopeful, resigned, sometimes all within the same minute. She paused. How did the vote go? Tied 7-7, which means I retain the position. We've implemented a modified leadership structure for the next 3 months to accommodate treatment schedules. You found balance. I'm trying. They discussed medical details, treatment protocols, and side effect management. Julia described the Houston apartment with appreciation for the thoughtful preparations Thomas had made, stocking her favorite teas, arranging for grocery delivery, ensuring the space had natural light for potential painting during recovery days. The art show invitations went out this morning, Thomas told her as their conversation wound down. Response has been immediate and enthusiastic. The gallery director says we may need to extend viewing hours based on interest levels. That's hard to process right now. It feels like something happening to someone else, someone who isn't sitting in an oncology department filling out trial consent forms. It's still you, Julia, the artist and the patient, both parts equally real. I know, it's just strange to think about people viewing my work while I'm here fighting for the chance to create more. She sighed, fatigue evident in her voice. I should go. More intake procedures this afternoon than settling into the apartment. Sophie and I will see you Saturday. She's packed her cloud painting supplies, convinced you'll want an art lesson regardless of how you're feeling. Julia's laugh carried genuine warmth despite her exhaustion. She's probably right. Art has always been my best medicine. After ending the call, Thomas stood at his office window overlooking downtown Austin. In one direction lay the corporate world he'd built temporarily secure, but fundamentally changed by recent events. In another direction, beyond what he could see, lay Houston and Julia fighting a battle with uncertain odds but unwavering courage. And waiting at home was Sophie, the center point around which everything else revolved. For the first time since Catherine's death, Thomas felt fully present in all dimensions of his life. Professional purpose, aligned with personal truth, future possibilities balanced against present realities, love expanding beyond fear of loss. The path ahead remained uncertain, filled with medical challenges, corporate politics, and emotional complexities that would demand continuous navigation. Yet uncertainty no longer seemed threatening. Like Julia's paper airplanes transformed into birds mid-flight, what began as fragile hope had somehow gained wings strong enough to carry them forward, not with guarantees but with possibility. Not with certainty but with courage. Not with promises of forever, but with commitment to whatever time they had together. Outside his window, Austin continued its midday bustle, people moving with purpose through lives containing their own private battles and triumphs. Thomas watched for a moment longer before turning back to his desk, ready to conclude business matters, before heading home to prepare for Saturday's journey to Houston. To Julia. To the next chapter neither of them had expected, but both now embraced with clear-eyed determination. Whatever came next, whether healing or hardship, remission or relapse, years or months, they would face it together, three people who had found each other through chance choice and the courage to launch hope into uncertain skies.